Part 69. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 681. At this time, Sun Wei was seen looking at the man with glasses with a smug look on his face. He looked like a villain who had achieved success, and people couldn't help but wave their hands to teach Sun Wei a lesson. What? Wasn't it very powerful? How come it fell so easily now? This is probably a bit ridiculous. Sun Wei said in a deep voice at this time. At this time, the man with glasses clenched his fist and looked at the red-faced wolf-tooth beast, but at this time, the red-faced wolf-tooth hand obviously took in less air and exhaled more air, and it seemed that it was not going to survive. Sun Wei looked completely smug. At this time, Long Linger just looked coldly at the masked man next to Sun Wei. This alien beast egg is for you. Ask your men to detoxify the red-faced wolf-tooth beast, and this matter is over. Long Linger's voice was full of coldness, and there was a bit of murderous aura on her body. At this time, after hearing what Long Linger said, the masked man just raised his hand lightly, and then his slender fingers drew a circle in the air, and then he lightly pointed forward. The circle instantly floated in front of the red-faced wolf-toothed beast, and then the circle almost completely wrapped the red-faced wolf-toothed beast in such a moment. A burst of dark green light poured down from the circle, wrapping the red-faced wolf-toothed beast, and in just a moment, the red-faced wolf-toothed beast stood up directly. At this time, the man with glasses had a livid face, and he felt like he was a tool used by the two of them to demonstrate. At this time, the man with glasses clenched his fists, and his fists were creaking. You damned, you actually treated my red-faced wolf-fanged beast like this, why? At this time, the man with glasses wanted to attack again, but Sun Wei, who was standing next to him, crossed his arms and didn't take the man with glasses seriously at all. He just waved his hand. The useless man is really noisy now. Alas, it's a pity that my eldest brother saved this useless beast, but he really doesn't know how to be grateful. The man with glasses took a step forward, and then the murderous aura on his body began to spread. What did you say? The man with glasses almost gritted his teeth and said this. At this time, he seemed to still want to continue the attack. But at this time, Long Linger just glanced at Nan with glasses casually, and then said coldly, enough, retreat. The voice of Long Linger was a little cold, and there was a bit of murderous aura on her body. At this time, the man with glasses turned his head and looked at Long Linger, and then his eyes were full of unwillingness. Linger, why? The voice of the man with glasses was even a little hoarse, and then he clenched his fists. Long Linger took a deep breath, and then calmed down a little. Alas, you are not the opponent of the two of them, no matter who it is, you are not their opponent, so forget it. At this time, the masked man walked forward a few steps, nailed to Long Linger with a smile on his face, and then gently raised Long Linger's chin, and he looked up and down at Long Linger. That's right, you are really sensible, so sensible that I don't even want to hurt you. Tell me, why are you so sensible, and your people are so sensible? After the masked man finished speaking, he suddenly glared at the man with glasses, his eyes flashed a bit of gloom, and a hint of murderous aura was revealed on his body. At this time, the man with glasses felt the murderous intent of the masked man, and his face began to look a little ugly. The man with glasses walked forward a few steps, and then his eyes were wide open. Asshole, damn it! The man with glasses seemed to be about to spit fire in his eyes. But the masked man didn't take the man with glasses seriously at all, and didn't even look at the man with glasses. His eyes were just fixed on Long Linger, and there was quite a bit of greed in his eyes. At this time, Long Linger just slapped the masked man's hand away, and then said coldly, you are very annoying like this, didn't anyone tell you? Long Linger's voice was a little hoarse, and the murderous aura on her body was even more stern. The masked man was not angry after Long Linger slapped his palm away, but just shook his head and smiled, and then looked at the man with glasses provocatively. I'm afraid that even if I hate it, I can't make you hate it as much as this guy. The masked man said slowly. The man with glasses turned red, and his expression was extremely ugly. After seeing this scene, Sun Wei, who was standing by, couldn't help but burst into laughter. He laughed so hard that he felt like he was about to die. Ha ha ha, brother, listen to me. A dog licker will end up with nothing. Look at how right my boss is, don't you think so? Sun Wei said while laughing, looking at the man with glasses. His eyes were full of ridicule. The man with glasses clenched his fists, and then he looked at Sun Wei coldly, and the murderous aura on his body began to gradually spread. Assholes, damn it, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. At this time, the man with glasses once again manipulated the red-faced wolf fang hand to attack the two. The red-faced wolf fang beast opened its bloody mouth at this time, and just when it was about to pounce on the two of them, the man with glasses just raised his head and glared at the red-faced wolf fang beast coldly. The red-faced wolf fang beast actually began to retreat one after another, and it looked very embarrassed, as if it was really scared. At this time, after the man with glasses saw this scene, his face instantly became ugly. He clenched his fists and said almost with gritted teeth, "Asshole, damn it, today I must make you look good, I swear." The masked man just hooked his hand lightly, and then a titan suddenly appeared behind the masked man. The titan directly grabbed the red-faced wolf fang beast. At this moment, a wailing sound came from the mouth of the red-faced wolf fang beast. The wailing sound echoed throughout the whole area, causing everyone who heard the wailing sound to tremble in their hearts. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 682. At this time, the masked man just turned his head and glanced at the man with glasses casually, just like a king who dominated the world looking down at his subjects, full of pity. "I just saved this cute little guy, but now I didn't expect that because of his master, this cute little guy will suffer again, but this time I don't plan to let him go." After the masked man finished speaking, he just snapped his fingers lightly, and then the Titan giant directly squeezed the wolf-toothed beast into a ball of blood mist. After seeing this scene, the man with glasses was stunned for a moment, and he let out a shrill scream, and his face turned pale instantly. "Don't." At this time, the man with glasses was even a little hysterical, and his whole face instantly solidified. In just a moment, he sat on the ground like this, with empty eyes and lifeless eyes. After the masked man saw this step, his expression began to become indifferent, and his tone was even filled with joy. "Look, even if you have suffered such hardships, your goddess will not care about your life or death, so why do you do this?" Longlinger just glanced coldly at the masked man, and then gritted her teeth and said, "You have enough." After hearing what Longlinger said, the masked man just smiled coldly, and then said in a deep voice, "I have enough? No, not enough, it's still far from it." The masked man looked like a complete lunatic at this time, completely crazy. After the masked man finished speaking, he immediately rushed towards Longlinger. The masked man was very fast and came to Longlinger in an instant. Then he grabbed Longlinger's neck. At this time, the masked man's face was full of two words of crazy, and he looked like crazy. At this time, Ye Lengshuang couldn't help it. She suddenly took a step forward, and then she said coldly, "What kind of ability is it to bully a woman?" Ye Lengshuang's voice was full of coldness, and the murderous aura on her body gradually permeated. At this moment, after hearing what Ye Lengshuang said, the masked man just glanced at Ye Lengshuang casually, and then his eyes instantly turned blood red, and the blood-red eyes made Ye Lengshuang's body tremble. Ye Lengshuang subconsciously took a few steps back, and looked at the masked man with a little more panic. At this moment, the masked man suddenly laughed. "Ha ha ha, you look a little scared. I don't know why you are scared. Is it because of me? If so, I want to say sorry to you. This masked man looks elegant and crazy at times, which makes people really puzzled. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu and Suyuyan knew that they could no longer hide. They could not leave Suyuyan alone and sit there and watch. So at this time, Lin Yu and Suyuyan also walked out slowly. They just glanced at the masked man casually, with a little more indifference in their expressions. That's enough. Lin Yu's voice was full of coldness. At this time, he was more like a king who dominated the world and looked down on the heroes. After hearing Lin Yu's voice, the masked man immediately looked at Lin Yu. At this moment, the masked man's mind trembled. Lin Yu just stood there, and the masked man felt a sense of fear. The masked man looked at Lin Yu, and then he gritted his teeth and said, "I didn't expect it was really you." The masked man's voice was a little hoarse at this time, and the look in his eyes when he looked at Lin Yu was full of coldness and murderous intent. Lin Yu just felt that the masked man seemed a little strange, because he didn't think he had any impression of the masked man, but looking at the masked man like this, it seemed that he recognized him, so it was no wonder that Lin Yu felt a little strange about the masked man. "You know me? It's really interesting. It's a great misfortune to be recognized by you." The masked man at this time laughed instantly after hearing Lin Yu say so. At this moment, he looked like he was completely crazy. "Ha ha ha, what you said is true. It's really your misfortune to be recognized by me." The masked man almost gritted his teeth and said, looking at Lin Yu with a look of indifference, and there was no color in his eyes. At this time, the masked man slowly took a step forward, and then the Titan giant appeared behind the masked man. This Titan giant is also the strange beast of the heavenly god Mirror. Legend has it that it has existed since the beginning of chaos. It has lived for many years now, and its history is extremely long and long. The masked man looked Lin Yu up and down, then shook his head. "You are not good enough, you are still far from it." After Lin Yu heard what the masked man said, he rolled his eyes and then just summoned the Kylin holy beast. "What a ridiculous and stupid guy. I don't know who gave it to you. You have the courage to talk to me like this. It's ridiculous, it's extremely ridiculous." Lin Yu said almost as if he was gritting his teeth, and then the blood energy in his body gradually began to spread. The cold aura made the masked man feel shuddering. The masked man subconsciously took a few steps back, and then took a deep breath. "Sure enough, you are strong enough. You are worthy of being the one who defeated even the Zo Protector. I am really becoming more and more curious about you today," the masked man just said in a cold voice. But at this time, after Lin Yu heard what the masked man said, his whole expression instantly became serious, and then he took a step forward directly, with a violent killing intent. The intention just started from his body and spewed out like crazy. Killing intent instantly filled the place. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 683. At this moment, Lin Yu couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly, and then continued to speak almost through gritted teeth. "Are you from that organization?" When the masked man heard what Lin Yu said, he just opened his mouth and smiled, and then said in a cold voice, "So what if it is? So what if it's not?" The masked man looked down at Lin Yu with a kind of indifference in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly, as if he wanted to forcibly restrain his impulse. But no matter what, Lin Yu suddenly realized how hard he was to control the impulse in his heart, and it seemed that he couldn't control it at this moment. After waiting for a moment, he suddenly waved his hand casually in front of him, and then the unicorn holy fire instantly enveloped the Titan. The Titan's body began to be burned bit by bit by the Kylin holy fire. At this time, the masked man's body also began to tremble suddenly following the Titan. The masked man fell to the ground like this, rolling back and forth on the ground and letting out screams one after another. However, his appearance seemed a bit exaggerated, as if he was doing it on purpose. The same as the acting. At this moment, the Titan also imitated the masked man's movements and fell to the ground rolling around. After a long while, the masked man suddenly stood up, and then glanced at Lin Yu casually. He gently touched his chin, and then just like this slightly shaked his head. "Oh, it's still a little bit behind. It's still a little bit behind. I originally thought you still had some ability, maybe you were very powerful, but now it seems that you are far behind," the masked man said coldly, looking at Lin Yu with a kind of indifference in his eyes. After Lin Yu saw the masked man like this, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. Then he calmed down and glanced at the masked man. It was just such a rough glance at this time, but Lin Yu suddenly discovered that the masked man seemed to be a bit more powerful than before. After Lin Yu thought of this, he couldn't help but feel a wave of panic in his heart. At this time, his pupils suddenly enlarged, and his brows seemed to be twisted together in an instant. "How is it possible? How could you?" The masked man suddenly smiled. He looked at Lin Yu condescendingly, with a bit of ridicule in his eyes. Then he shook his head slightly. "You are not my opponent yet, and you will never be. I want to avenge Master Zhou. Share the worries for Lord Throne." After Suyian and Ye Lengshuang saw this scene, their expressions could not help but condense slightly, and there was a bit of helplessness in their eyes, and then they took a deep breath. "Oops, if this guy really succeeds, then I'm afraid this matter will be terrible." At this time, the faces of Suyian and Ye Lengshuang seemed to be twisted into a ball, and their expressions were filled with a kind of helplessness. At this time, the masked man seemed to have noticed Suyian and Ye Lengshuang. He just glanced at the two women casually, and then waved. "Everything should be over. There is no way this little guy can be a safe haven for you two. If he dies, you two will die too. You will both be destroyed. Only destruction is eternal." After the masked man finished speaking, he snapped his fingers again, and others saw that the Titan was split into two, and instantly turned into two Titans. Originally, one Titan was enough to cause a headache, but suddenly there was another Titan, and the strength of the extra Titan was actually as strong as the main body. At this time, Lin Yu quickly returned to his consciousness and found Arya. Lin Yu said to Arya in a deep voice, "Arya, tell me quickly, who is this guy, what's going on? How come this guy's beast can still split? This is probably too unbelievable." After Arya heard what Lin Yu said, without any hesitation, she began to examine the Titan bit by bit for Lin Yu. "Master, this should be the Titan of the Titan clan. According to legend, this Titan once supported the heaven and earth, surrounding the huge stone pillars of heaven and earth. The stones rolled down from it were born with absolute defense that can restrain everything, and this Titan's innate skill is splitting and growing." At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Arya said, he was shocked and dumbfounded. At this time, he took a deep breath and calmed down a little. "Are you telling the truth? This matter is really unbelievable. I have never seen or heard of it," Lin Yu just said in a deep voice, his face also slightly pale. He subconsciously took a few steps back, and the bitter smile at the corner of his mouth was even more obvious. When Arya saw that Lin Yu seemed to have no fighting spirit, she naturally couldn't help but feel a little worried. "Actually, Master, this may not be the case." After hearing what Arya said, Lin Yu turned around and looked at Arya, and then someone whispered, "What's going on? Tell me." At this time, Lin Yu turned around and stared at Arya, with a complicated look in his eyes. In fact, in the face of absolute strength, all talents and skills are useless. In fact, the Master can completely upgrade the level of the space-time beast to the God level, because after reaching the God level, the space-time beast will learn another new talent skill, space-time annihilation. This space-time annihilation is the nemesis of this Titan giant. After Arya said this, Lin Yu just coughed lightly, and then a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This is easier said than done. You know that if you want to upgrade this space-time beast to the level of a god, it is not too difficult if you plan for the long term. But now that time is so tight, what you said is simply a fantasy. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 684. At this time, Arya heard Lin Yu. After saying this, she couldn't help but hide her face and smile, and even looked at Arya casually. You can tell at a glance that you haven't paid attention to the changes in the mall these days. If you have paid attention to the changes in the mall, you will know that there is an upgrade pill in the mall that can be exchanged for 1 piece of gold. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Arya said, his expression began to become a little complicated. He took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. What? What did you say? Upgrade pill? There is such a magical elixir? Are you sure today is not April Fool's Day? Arya smiled, of course not. I can tell you with certainty that there is such a pill. I wonder what your current intentions are? Do you want to redeem it? Lin Yu nodded seriously, of course. Exchange the upgrade pill. Congratulations to the host, the exchange was successful. As soon as Dang Chao finished speaking, a small white bottle suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's hand. At this time, Lin Yu looked at the small white bottle in his hand, and then the corner of his mouth curled up into a smile. As for the masked man in front of Lin Yu, when he looked at the small white bottle that suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's hand, his mind suddenly froze, and then his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's hand. On top of this little white bottle, a sarcastic smile appeared on the corner of the masked man's mouth, and his eyes looked at Lin Yu with a hint of amusement, and then he slowly took another step towards Lin Yu. The ground began to gradually approach. Lin Yu seemed to have noticed the presence of the masked man. He slowly raised his head, glanced coldly at the masked man, and then said with gritted teeth, I advise you'd better stop now, otherwise, you will know what the price is. Lin Yu almost said this through gritted teeth. His eyes when he looked at the masked man were filled with an indifferent coldness, which made the masked man's expression gradually start to tremble slightly. After the masked man heard what Lin Yu said, he suddenly smiled. He just stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, looking at Lin Yu's eyes as if he was looking at a jumper. He looked like a clown and didn't take him seriously at all. His expression was quite indifferent, and his expression was full of a kind of coldness. Little guy, although I am aware of your arrogance, I don't want to think about it. Not only are you arrogant, but you are also an idiot. The masked man looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. The playful look in the corners of his eyes and brows began to make business more obvious, and a mocking smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. He forcibly suppressed the excitement in his heart, and then walked towards the masked man, glanced coldly, and the cold look on his face made the masked man tremble when he saw it. Really? It's really interesting? I really don't understand. I'm so nice to persuade you, why are you like this? Is it true that this dog can't change and eat shit? The clay bodhisattva was full of anger, not to mention that the masked man was still a human being. After hearing what Lin Yu said, the masked man became furious for a while, and then he suddenly took a step forward, his eyes widened with anger and he stared at Lin Yu. Asshole! What did you say? If you have the guts, tell me clearly. Do you think it's hard for me not to kill you? The masked man almost said this through gritted teeth, and the murderous intention in his body began to be released without reservation at this moment. But at this moment, Lin Yu seemed like a masked man who was deliberately trying to anger him. He just waved his hand gently, and then shook his head and smiled, kill me? That depends on whether you have it or not. That's what you have. But looking at the coward you are looking at now, it probably won't work. Suyin, Ye Lengshuang and Long Linger in the distance saw the scene and thought that Lin Yu might be crazy for daring to provoke the masked man like this. As expected, the masked man lived up to Lin Yu's expectations. He just glanced coldly at Lin Yu, and then smiled loudly. Ha ha ha, stupid guy, you are really stupid. If there is a way to heaven, you will not take it? If there is no door to hell, you will throw yourself into it? If you want to die so much, just let me make it happen for you today. After the masked man finished speaking, he suddenly flew towards Lin Yu, and then he saw the masked man just for a moment, and he had already arrived in front of Lin Yu, and then quickly he curled his fingers slightly and grabbed Lin Yu's face like this. Immediately afterwards, he saw the Titan also swinging his fist and hitting Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to be doing this on purpose. He turned slightly to the side, and then quickly he summoned the space-time beast to his side. Lin Yu quickly grabbed the hands of Suyin and Ye Lengshuang, and then appeared on the back of the space-time beast in the next second. Lin Yu threw away the upgraded pill, and the next second, a pure medicinal power suddenly appeared in the mouth of the space-time beast and entered its body. The pure medicinal power began to gradually spread in the body of the space-time beast. At this time, the Titan giant smashed forward heavily, but there was no trace of the space-time beast. Not to mention the Titan giant, even that guy was stunned after seeing this scene. The masked man glanced around, but there was no trace of Lin Yu at all. At this time, the masked man suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. The next second, Lin Yu appeared directly behind the masked man, and then a powerful force was released from Lin Yu's palm, and the masked man was directly knocked away by Lin Yu. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 685. When the masked man saw this scene, he was stunned. The masked man stared at Lin Yu with an expression full of surprise. How is this possible? Although your strength is not weak, you definitely shouldn't be this strong. How is this possible? How is this possible? At this time, the masked man was even a bit hysterical. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled. He pinned the masked man with a smile on his face. There was a rather gloomy look between his eyebrows, and then he smiled so lightly. He gently spread his hands. Nothing is impossible. It's not about how strong I am, but because you are indeed too weak. It's so weak that it's ridiculous. Lin Yu said in a deep voice, and then looked at the masked man with a smile on his face. There was a bit of gloominess in his eyes, and the murderous aura on his body started to show, without reservation. Was released. A monstrous momentum surged out like this, and the bloody aura made everyone's soul start to tremble slightly. Then, a violent and fierce aura emanated from the Titan. The pressure from the bones made Lin Yu's expression condense. Lin Yu looked at the violent power leaking from the Titan in front of him. At this time, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. I didn't expect this big guy to be able to exude such tyrannical power. This is really beyond my expectation. Lin Yu just rubbed his chin gently, and then shook his head. In the next second, Lin Yu seemed to understand something. He took a step forward, followed by a domineering and fierce aura. At this moment, this releases it. Then a low roar was heard from Lin Yu's mouth, and Lin Yu's skin began to slowly crack at this moment. At this time, the space beast was behind Lin Yu, and its body began to emit a dazzling light. Suyin and Ye Lengshuang, who had been placed in a safe place, looked a little surprised when they saw Lin Yu and the space-time beast in the void. At this time, the two of them looked at each other. What kind of monster is this? Not only is he a monster, but his own beast is also a rare monster. It's really scary, really scary. At this time, Suyin was speaking in a low voice, and Ye Lengshuang heard it. After Suyin said this, She couldn't help but nodded lightly, and there was a sense of solemnity on her face. Sure enough, he is an out-and-out pervert. Suyuyan looked at the look of envy in Ye Langshuang's eyes, and just smiled, and then she whispered to Ye Langshuang half-jokingly. How about it? How about you take him in? Let him fall under your pomegranate skirt. When the time comes, won't you be able to ask him to help you improve a little? At this time, Suyuyan was staring straight at Ye Langshuang, with a hint of amusement in the corners of her eyes and eyebrows, and the smile at the corners of her mouth began to become more and more obvious. Ye Langshuang heard this. After Suyuyan said this, she couldn't help but turn her head and glared at Suyuyan fiercely. Then she waved her little fist and started to say such a deep voice to Suyuyan. Said. If you dare to say nonsense again, believe it or not, I will slap you. The fact that two people were still playing and having fun in such an environment showed that these two people obviously did not take this matter too seriously. After seeing this scene, the masked man was naturally agitated. He was furious, and the masked man's eyes were filled with a murderous aura. At this time, the masked man let out an angry roar, and a murderous aura gradually began to flow out of his body. You actually have the guts to ignore me like this. I think you are really fed up with your heart and courage. You are so tired of living. After the masked man finished speaking, he suddenly stepped forward, and then the Titan, which he controlled like this, smashed towards Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang. After Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang saw this scene, their faces suddenly turned ugly, and then they took a deep breath and then retreated directly. One after another, and after taking several steps back, he finally managed to stabilize his body. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but feel a little anxious when he looked at the space-time beast behind him that was making a breakthrough. At this time, Lin Yu was thinking that it would be difficult to summon the Eternal Thunder Dragon back now, so it seemed that it was indeed in a deadlock. At this time, Lin Yu gently rubbed his chin, then pondered for a moment, and finally shook his head slightly. Well, now that we are in this situation, it is really difficult to break through it for a while. I just don't know when the time and space beast will be able to complete the breakthrough. Maybe it will wait until the time and space beast breaks through. After that, this matter can be resolved smoothly. Lin Yu said softly like this, a strange color flashed between his eyebrows, and then he sighed softly. Although it is a dead end at this moment, it is not so complete. If you want to solve it, there are probably some ways, but for Lin Yu, this method may be too costly to use. So when Lin Yu thought of this, a bit of solemnity flashed between his eyebrows, but in the end, Lin Yu gritted his teeth like this, and a bit of coldness flashed between the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. And then took a step forward, with some murderous intent on his body clearly revealed at this moment. At this time, the corner of Lin Yu's mouth also evoked a bit of a sneer. He just glanced around. At this moment, Lin Yu's eyes were filled with a kind of roiling blood. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 686. When Lin Yu thought of this, he had an aura of going forward and facing death, and the blood-killing intention in his body was displayed unscrupulously at this time. He just took a gentle step forward, then half closed his eyes, and then the smile at the corner of his mouth began to gradually become obvious. Lin Yu clasped his hands together, and then held flowers with one hand. Then he saw a mysterious aura suddenly rising around Lin Yu. The mysterious aura went straight up to the sky, making everyone's minds uncontrollable. So trembling. Then they saw Lin Yu using his own secret method to forcefully activate the red-trained yellow sand beast and the fire Kylin. The red-trained yellow sand beast and the fire Kylin were forcibly pushed forward by half a level by Lin Yu. After Lin Yu finished all this, his face suddenly showed a bit of satisfaction. At this time, a smile of relief appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then he nodded gently. Yes, this time, it's really good. At this time, Lin Yu's face was even slightly pale, but to Lin Yu, all this was nothing. His eyes were full of excitement, and there was an excited smile at the corner of his mouth. It's basically self-evident. After a while, he heard Lin Yu murmuring words. The mysterious aura on his body condensed out here, and then the extremely mysterious power in the void came out at the same place. Over time, they solidified together. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly understood something. Standing alone on the sky, he felt as if he was the supreme ruler of the world. He moved forward indomitably, and the aura on his body was natural. It is also self-evident. At this moment, Lin Yu was condescending. He just glanced ahead, and then shook his head. Fire burns the sky, and yellow sand destroys the world. At this moment, when Lin Yu finished speaking, he saw two auras, one red and one yellow. The church circled until it finally coalesced together, and then smashed towards the Titan like this crazily. The speed of those two breaths was extremely fast. In just a moment, they actually arrived in front of the Titan. At this time, Lin Yu didn't take Lin Yu to heart at all. When the masked man saw it, after this scene, the whole person couldn't help but start to tremble slightly. The masked man subconsciously took a few steps back and stared at Lin Yu with a frightened look on his face. How is it possible? How could you have such strength? This is absolutely impossible. At this time, the masked man was even a little incoherent. At this time, he saw the frightened look on the masked man's face, which was really quite funny. It's just that although those two auras are not weak, compared to this Titan, they are still a little less powerful. The moment those two breaths hit the Titan, there was an explosion that resounded throughout the sky. Then the Titan just used his fists to protect his chest, and directly blocked the explosion. At this time, the masked man couldn't help laughing after seeing this scene. The masked man's expression instantly became crazy, and his eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of indifference. Meaning, ha ha ha, aren't you very powerful? Today I wanted to see how powerful you really are, but now it seems that you are nothing more than that and not worth mentioning at all. The masked man seemed to be a successful villain, giving people the urge to go up and slap him. But Lin Yu finally resisted the urge. At this time, Lin Yu just smiled like this. Really? But you seem to have forgotten something. Lin Yu spoke softly like this, but there was a strong sense of power in his words that no one could refuse, and a trembling feeling that made everyone's hearts condense. After seeing this scene, the masked man just looked at Lin Yu up and down, and then snorted coldly, "What did I forget? Ha ha ha, that's ridiculous, I don't think so. What can I forget? But I do remember that you should die now." After the masked man finished speaking, he began to form seals with his hands. At this time, the masked man was mumbling words, and the breath on his body even began to tremble uncontrollably. The aura on the masked man began to surge rapidly, and then a light yellow aura began to spread out of the Titan's body. Then, they saw the spreading aura next to them, which made everyone's hearts tremble. The light yellow aura instantly swept towards everyone. A powerful force made Lin Yu's expression look ugly. When Lin Yu felt such a powerful force, he moved backwards one after another. After taking several steps back, he barely managed to stabilize his body. At this time, Lin Yu's face suddenly turned cold. The killing energy in his body was released without reservation at this moment. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, then smiled, and then coughed softly, "Ahem, it seems that you do have some skills. In this case, you will have to pay a price." At this time, Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward, and then the murderous blood on his body made everyone's mind tremble suddenly. At this time, even the masked man felt the cold and strong murderous intent on Lin Yu's body, and his expression was a little flustered, and his face began to gradually become ugly. The masked man just raised a few sneers at the corners of his mouth, and then he took a step forward and stared at Lin Yu, and the murderous aura on his body suddenly came out. At this moment, Lin Yu seemed to be able to feel the terrifying murderous aura from the masked man. He was slightly startled at this moment, and then he subconsciously took a few steps back. The two of them just stood there. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 687. At this time, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. He half closed his eyes, and then gently rubbed his chin. I began to think about what I should do this time. Lin Yu just pondered for a moment, and then a trace of gloom flashed in his eyes. At the end, the corner of Lin Yu's mouth suddenly curled up into a sneer. I didn't expect that I really encountered a tough problem today. It's really rare, but it doesn't matter anymore. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he suddenly took a step forward, and then the waves of blood that were tumbling on his body began to gradually solidify together, and finally there was a violent surge. And the fierce strength made everyone's heart start to tremble slightly. Lin Yu's expression turned cold, and the blood-killing aura in his body made everyone subconsciously take a few steps back. Those people looked at Lin Yu with a bit more fear. At this moment, Lin Yu also smiled suddenly. At this moment, he heard him smile coldly, and the corners of his eyes and eyebrows were filled with a cold look. Ha ha ha, no matter what happens today, if I am here, there is no way that you can cause such a big disturbance. Lin Yu almost said this through gritted teeth. At this time, after the masked man heard what Lin Yu said, his whole expression suddenly became indifferent, and his eyes looking at Lin Yu were full of disdain and contempt. At this moment, the masked man shook his head, and then waved his hand directly, with a sneer on the corner of his mouth. Although your strength may not be weak, in my opinion, it's still a little bit off. If I'm not mistaken, the beast behind you should be breaking through, but do you think he can really break through? The masked man stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and then said in a cold voice. There was a bit more mockery in his eyes, and the murderous aura in his body began to gradually become, it solidified. At this time, Lin Yu took a step forward, and then someone let out a low growl. He clenched his fists, gritted his teeth, and then said in a cold voice, no matter what, I will definitely be able to persist until he breaks through, do you understand? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the masked man. His eyes were full of indifference, and the sneer and condensed smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. Stand up. After the masked man saw this scene, he just shook his head, and then let out a long sigh. Oh, I really can't explain this to you, but it's not important anymore. What's important is that you will die, I said so. After the masked man finished speaking, he gently took a step forward, and then the blood-killing intention on his body gradually solidified from his body, and the front of the Titan's chest was this adds a huge light cannon. The masked man gently waved his hand forward, and then the huge light cannon rushed straight towards Lin Yu's face. The speed of the light cannon was very fast, and it arrived in front of Lin Yu in the blink of an eye, and then the light cannon suddenly hit Lin Yu's chest so hard. Even after Lin Yu saw the light cannon, his whole expression seemed to be frozen. He subconsciously moved towards and took a few steps back, and his body was suddenly startled. But after the masked man saw this scene, the corners of his mouth just raised a bit of sneer, and then he shook his head, and then sighed in a pretentious manner. Oh, I originally thought you could be so powerful, but now it seems like nothing more than that, not worth mentioning at all. The masked man said in a cold voice, looking at Lin Yu with a look of indifference in his eyes. The blood-killing aura in his body instantly began to solidify, and the blood aura gradually solidified little by little. From the beginning, it gradually spread. After waiting for a while, a majestic force shot up into the sky in an instant. After the two forces collided, a violent explosion occurred. The violent explosion directly hit Lin Yu. It flew out. At this time, after Lin Yu reluctantly crawled out, he felt a sweetness in his throat, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. Lin Yu's face was full of reluctance. At this time, he dug into his fist and said almost as if he was gritting his teeth. Why is this like this? But at this time, the space-time beast is still making a breakthrough quietly in the distance. Looking at it now, the space-time beast still has no intention of completing the breakthrough. At this moment, the scene around him started to boil. Lin Yu's face looked a little ugly. At this time, he also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Why is this happening? At this moment, Lin Yu was shouting hysterically, and the blood in his body was released without reservation. At this moment, his eyes were wide open, and his eyes were full of unwillingness. After a while, the masked man suddenly flew towards Lin Yu. The masked man looked down at Lin Yu, and his eyes were filled with indifference. The smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. Give up, you are not my opponent. Surrender obediently, maybe you still have a way out. Otherwise, I think you can know your fate at that time. The masked man just looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and the playful look in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows gradually became more obvious, and the corners of his mouth even raised a few sneers. At this time, Lin Yu climbed up with difficulty, staring at the masked man, his face full of unwillingness, and the murderous intent in his body began to become obvious. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 688. Boy, I admit that I may lose for a while now, but this is not absolute, let alone forever. What I lost will eventually be recovered. After the masked man heard what Lin Yu said, he was slightly stunned at first, but after a moment he shook his head and smiled. His face looked a little ugly, and then he looked up and down Lin Yu's body for a while. The sneer at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. Don't say it's me. If you don't believe me, just tell me what you said. Do you believe it yourself? After the masked man finished speaking, he slightly curled his 5 fingers with his palm upward, and then he gently hooked upwards. A powerful force came from around him and he pulled himself up. At this time, Lin Yu could feel the pressure around him, so at this time, blood flowed out from Lin Yu's forehead. Lin Yu's face looked a little ugly. At this time, he began to struggle desperately. But the masked man seemed to just want to see Lin Yu's jokes. Although he had the upper hand at this time, he had no intention of killing Lin Yu. He just stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. Looking back and forth at Lin Yu. Oh, I originally thought you had some ability, but now it seems that you are simply too weak, beyond weak. Of course the masked man's name was Lin Yu, and he couldn't help it. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly took a step forward, and then his whole person changed like an angry beast. His eyes widened with anger, staring at the masked man, and he let out a low growl. What did you say? If you have the guts, let me go now. At this time, after the 2 women Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang saw the scene from a distance, they were instantly shocked and dumbfounded. There was a look of disbelief in the corners of their eyes and eyebrows, and they were not at all. I dare to believe what I see in my eyes. Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang looked at each other, and then said softly, what's going on? Lin Yu has lost? How is this possible? This is absolutely impossible. Suyuyan and Ye Langshuang were talking softly like this, with a look of complete surprise between their brows, and a look of complete incomprehension in their eyes as they looked at each other. At this time, Ye Langshuang frowned slightly, her face twisted slightly, and then a bitter smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. The strength of that masked man is probably extraordinary. Now it seems. Ye Langshuang was relatively calm at this time, but although Yeleng was relatively calm, Suyuyan couldn't calm down anymore. Suyuyan suddenly took a step forward, and then turned her head, her eyes fixed on Yeleng. No matter what, we must save him this time. At this time, Amelia Su was almost speaking hysterically. After Yeleng heard what Suyuyan said, a wry smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. There was a look of helplessness in her eyes, and there was a sense of sadness between her eyebrows. Oh, of course you want to save him, but do you know that with our current strength, it may be impossible to save him? At this time, Suyuyan said helplessly, and her whole eyebrows were filled with a sense of loneliness. But after Yeleng heard what Suyuyan said, he didn't believe it. His eyes were full of determination, and then he spoke almost as if he was gritting his teeth. No matter what the price, we must save Lin Yu. At this time, Suyuyan's eyes were fixed on Yeleng, and then she spoke in a deep voice, and the blood in her body began to boil out. At this time, Suyuyan seemed to want to say something more, but she also knew very well that no matter what she said, it would be useless. The best way now is probably to follow what Suyuyan said. At this time, I saw the Titan giant, and suddenly smashed towards the space-time beast. At this moment, two alien beasts, one black and one white, soared into the sky in an instant, and the two light pillars of opposite colors directly blocked the space-time beast. In front of this time and space beast, there was a blue sky and a dark night, and the two strange beasts instantly turned into a Tai Chi pattern, blocking the way of the space beast. At this time, even Lin Yu couldn't help being shocked and dumbfounded after seeing this scene, and a look of disbelief flashed between his brows. At this time, Lin Yu was naturally very moved. At this moment, Lin Yu was even so excited that he was speechless. At this time, I saw the masked man, clenching his fists clenching loudly, and then he said with gritted teeth, damn it, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you. I have to kill you." At this time, the masked man let out a low roar. There was a cold look in the corners of his eyes and brows, and the murderous aura in his body began to gradually spread. An icy aura gradually swept over Suyuyan and Yeleng from the masked man. Suyuyan and Yeleng could certainly feel the momentum sweeping towards them, but they were not panicking at all. Instead, they looked at each other and then suddenly turned sideways. At this time, Suyuyan and Yeleng were not slow, and they quickly avoided the cold breath, but what they never expected was that the cold breath was like a maggot attached to the bone, which was difficult to deal with, and the blood on their bodies gradually began to churn. Such a violent force made everyone's soul tremble suddenly, and the blood-killing intention began to spread gradually in an instant. Oh no, this power is a bit scary. At this time, Lin Yu's heart was like falling into the valley, and her mind couldn't help but tremble slightly. She suddenly had a bad premonition in her heart, and the beauties were quite helpless. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chong. Chapter 689. At this moment, a voice suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's mind. When Lin Yu heard the voice, his already dim eyes instantly became excited, and the corners of his mouth became more excited. It evoked a faint smile. Master, I have one more move, but after using this move, I'm afraid I will have to sleep for a while. The voice of the Killian Yellow Sand Beast suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's mind. When Lin Yu heard the voice of the red-trained Yellow Sand Beast, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. At this time, his voice even trembled slightly. Do you still have any trump cards available? At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Killian Huangsha Beast's eyes clearly showed a bit of helplessness, and there was a bit of a wry smile on the corner of his mouth. There was a look between his eyebrows. Quite a bit helpless. This is my last trump card, but whether I can block this guy's attack is a matter of two people. But now I'm afraid I can only fight to the death. At this time, Lin Yu saw the look of determination in the eyes of the man who was obsessed with Huang Xiaoxiao, and he couldn't help but feel such emotion in his heart. At this time, he just said softly towards the red sand beast, "Are you sure, you can really do it?" At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the scarlet refined yellow sand beast couldn't help but feel stunned for a while. After hesitating for a long time, a trace of determination flashed in the eyes of the red refined yellow sand beast. Meaning, and then nodded gently, "I'm sure, no problem." At this time, after Lin Yu heard what the scarlet Lian Huangsha beast said, a hint of joy flashed through his eyes, and a hint of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Okay, this time it's all up to you." At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the scarlet trained yellow sand beast flew forward and then immediately grew in size. In just a blink of an eye, it had already reached the height of 100 feet. But with just one breath, he could fly 30,000 miles into the wind in an instant. Finally, around the red-trained yellow sand beast, the sky-wide yellow sand flew up. But at this moment, Lin Yu's already dim mind was rekindled with a glimmer of hope. A slight smile appeared on the corner of Lin Yu's mouth, and his eyes were fixed on the body of this red-trained yellow sand beast. The red-trained yellow sand beast let out a roar that resounded throughout the world. The yellow sand in the sky was like knives, suddenly rushing towards the masked man and the Titan giant. The violent murderous intent rose up all over the sky. At this time, after everyone felt the murderous intent all over the sky, their expressions could not help but start to tremble slightly. Especially at this moment, Lin Yu's face froze slightly after seeing this scene, and his eyes were full of astonishment. At this time, the masked man never expected that although the red sand beast looked small, it still had such a trump card and such terrifying power. After the masked man saw this scene, the corners of his mouth also evoked a bit of a smile, and there was also a bit of mockery in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, around the masked man, a majestic murderous intent shot out into the sky, and the murderous intent in the sky began to spread bit by bit. At this time, the Titan just punched the front so hard, and then the surrounding space was instantly extinguished. In just that breath, a violent attraction emitted from the surrounding space. That violent suction force directly sucked the yellow sand all over the sky into it. At this time, the masked man laughed like this, as if he was crazy. Standing there, he felt like he was looking down on the world and arrogant. At this time, the Titan was standing behind the masked man. The terrifying pressure on the Titan made Lin Yu unable to help but feel breathless. At this moment, I saw the red sand beast slowly falling from the mid-air, and then fell heavily to the ground. A dead end, now it has become a dead end. The masked man looked down at Lin Yu from a high position. A smile gradually began to spread at the corner of his mouth, and his expression was full of coldness. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't help but take a deep breath, and then clenched his fists. Damn it! Lin Yu almost said this through gritted teeth. At this time, his expression was full of indifference, and a cold aura began to snake out. The cold aura instantly moved towards the masked man. It swept across like this. But at this time, when the masked man faced the murderous intention in Lin Yu, he only had a sneer on his lips, and then waved his hand casually. It's over, everything should be over, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, you should return to the embrace of death. The masked man was condescending and stared directly at Lin Yu. Then he waved his hand gently in front of him. The Titan suddenly moved towards Lin Yu, so directly. Caught it? At this time, Lin Yu just wanted to dodge, but was firmly grasped by the Titan. No matter how Lin Yu struggled, he could not break free from the Titan. At this time, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu suddenly felt a sense of death. At this time, Lin Yu suddenly smiled, his eyes were full of helplessness, and the corners of his mouth even raised a few bitter smiles. It seems that it has become a dead end now. I don't seem to be able to escape from this dead end. At this time, Lin Yu said helplessly, with a bit of gloom in his eyes, and his eyes were full of helplessness. At this time, the masked man looked down at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, and his expression was a bit indifferent, and then he nodded slightly. What you said is absolutely true. You are now doomed. Do you have any last words? If you have any, you can say them now, because if you don't, you will never have another chance. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 690. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes widened with anger. At this time, his fists were clenching, and the murderous intention in his body began to spread. There was clear knowledge in his eyes, and a gloomy look. His face was filled with a kind of unwillingness. I don't have any last words, I just feel a little bit unwilling to do so. I'm so unwilling. At this time, Lin Yu was almost speaking like this through gritted teeth. At this moment, his eyes looking at the masked man were filled with an innate indifference and coldness. At this time, the masked man grabbed Lin Yu's neck, and then said with gritted teeth, "Aren't you very powerful? I really want to see how powerful you are today. How about it, let me take a good look." After the masked man finished speaking, he directly controlled the Titan and threw Lin Yu away. Finally, the Titan once again grabbed Lin Yu like a toy. In the palm of his hand, at this moment, Lin Yu felt like he was a toy being played with in the midst of applause. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face turned livid, and the corners of his eyes and brows were filled with a gloomy look. The blood in his body was released without reservation at this moment. An angry roar came from his mouth. "Ah, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you." At this time, the masked man didn't pay attention to Lin Yu at all. The corner of his mouth was just a little sneer, and there was a bit of indifference in his eyes. It's completely a gloomy look. You want to kill me? Okay, I'm standing here now. If you have the ability, kill me. I will never dodge. After the masked man said this, he couldn't help laughing. At this time, the masked man seemed to be completely crazy. There was a completely gloomy look in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, Suyiyan and Ye Lengshuang, after seeing this scene, couldn't bear it any longer and suddenly flew forward. Suyiyan and Ye Lengshuang immediately turned towards the mask. The man flew over here. After the masked man saw this scene, he just grabbed it lightly with his hand, and then the two women's strange beasts were instantly caught in the palm of the Titan's palm. The terrifying thing about this Titan is probably that his arms can be extended infinitely, and his arms have the ability to regenerate. As long as the Titan stands on the earth, it can continuously absorb the power of the earth. At this time, the masked man's mouth also evoked a somewhat indifferent smile. At this time, he saw the masked man's cold face nailed to Suyiyan's body. That terrifying aura began to gradually emanate from Suyiyan's body almost in an instant. That mysterious aura was revealed unreservedly for just a moment, and there was a slight indifference in the masked man's expression. I didn't expect that there is actually a woman who is willing to fight for you here. This is really something I didn't expect, but it doesn't matter now. At this time, the masked man's eyes were staring straight at Lin Yu. The playful smile at the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious, and there was a bit of mockery in his eyes. His body showed a bit of gloominess. At this time, Lin Yu was furious after seeing this scene. However, at this moment, Lin Yu was being subdued by the masked man. Although he was unwilling to do so, he had no choice but to do anything. The masked man stared at Lin Yu with a smile on his face. There was quite a bit of indifference in his affection, a rather gloomy look in the corners of his eyes and brows, and a sneer on the corner of his mouth. It's becoming more and more obvious. At this time, Lin Yu also let out an angry roar, followed by a violent murderous intent, which began to gradually spread. No matter what, I will kill you. However, the mask at this time was ugly, and Xiang Lin Yu's eyes were filled with a kind of indifference. It seemed that he didn't take Lin Yu seriously at all, and just smiled and shook his head. Don't blame me for not believing you. Considering your current situation, why do you think you are qualified to kill me? The masked man looked like Lin Yu, his eyes filled with a bit of coldness, and the corners of his mouth evoked a somewhat meaningful smile. At this time, Lin Yu just took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. At this time, Lin Yu had a gloomy look in his eyes. After a while, a hint of helplessness seemed to flash through Lin Yu's eyes. Oh, it's hard to say it all, it's hard to say it all. At this time, Lin Yu could feel the violent pressure on his body, which began to become more and more obvious. Lin Yu's eyes were filled with a look of helplessness, and the corners of his mouth were even more raised. A bit of a wry smile. And just after this moment, a churning force soared into the sky, and then the next second Lin Yu felt like he was wrapped in a soft force, and finally Lin Yu felt like it disappeared directly in place. The masked man was shocked and stunned when he saw this scene. The masked man obviously didn't understand what was going on. He took a deep breath and calmed down. How is it possible? How is it possible? The masked man's face gradually became ugly. At this time, Lin Yu was seen standing on the head of the space-time beast. The space-time beast exuded a colorful light, and two dragon horns suddenly appeared on the top of the space-time beast. The space-time beast looked at Lin Yu with a smile on his face, just like a child who got good grades asking his parents for candy. The space-time beast looked like this now. The masked man was stunned when he saw this scene. At this moment, he was staring at the space-time beast with his eyes wide open. A murderous intent rose to the sky.